Hello and welcome to the HRD podcast. I'm your host today, Emily Sexton-Brown. I'm the editor of HRD Connect, and we're here with our special guest, Bruce Daisley, the Vice President EMEA of Twitter.
Hello there.
Lovely to have you here. Bruce, could you tell us a little bit about your background and your job?
Yeah, so I work at Twitter, obviously. I've been at Twitter now for 7 years. So in the grand life of Twitter, that's quite a long time. Prior to that, I used to work at YouTube at Google. So when Google first bought YouTube, I spent about 4 years sort of getting the UK team going there. So that was quite good fun. Prior to that, I was sort of background in radio and magazines. And I guess, I've become obsessed as a side hustle in like work culture, and I've sort of run a podcast on work culture. I've spent sort of the last 2 years doing that. So my own podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, has really just driven has indulged and satisfied my own interest in the world of HR, really.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel that was a necessary? Was it a needed thing in the market, I guess? Have you had a good reception?
How I got into it. So the very first job I had was working as part of Capital Radio, and we were like this quirky little offshoot. There was sort of like this little department, and it was at times chaotic and at times one of the most joyous places I could ever describe. There were late nights, but like this incredible bond between people. And I developed a personal fascination with what the secret ingredients of good culture are. Because, for every reason that you might look down a checklist to say what would characterise good culture, this organisation didn't have some of the basics. And so it made me really fascinated. What makes a good culture? When I went on to Google, my team there was famous for being famous for being a great team. People used to wander past going, wow, that YouTube team, such an incredible team. It was famous within the organisation. And I thought, I took immense pride in that, actually. But I think probably the hubris was that I decided that I was responsible for that. And when I was at Twitter, similarly, people used to come to the London office and go, wow, the London office has just got something magical about it. And so I just decided that was down to my superpowers. And then later on, I just realised, I started looking into it at a time, candidly, when the culture wasn't as good. And I thought, I wonder what I used to do that I don't do now. And I started exploring, I guess, psychology and organisational behaviour and some of the key components of HR. And I was really struck by talking to experts and talking to professors in these things, how little evidence about what makes a good working environment was permeating the world of work. So it really struck me that, wow, people have done studies into open plan, or they've done studies into the impact that stress has on creativity. And I was just astonished that people who did day jobs never heard these things. So my passion was to try and seek out these truth tellers, these people who've done the research into it, and to interview them candidly for my own self-learning, but then to share that with other people.
And you speak about that fantastic culture. What do you think was that magic ingredient? How did you foster that? Because that's something that a lot of people struggle with or are trying to build. And, obviously it has to be a natural thing. But is there something that you could, give a little tip? Yeah,
I mean, and obviously I wrestle with this. I've turned this into a new book, sort of The Joy of Work. Yeah. And the thing I wrestled with was, firstly, I felt that quite often good cultures, back to my own experience, my good cultures aren't always determined by an act of leadership. I know that, you wander past the business section W.H. Smith's and, if you're flying somewhere and there's all these leadership books, I think, and my personal opinion, I think that's something of a red herring. It sort of, it suits the person going through the airport that they're going to be the person who creates success. But in my experience, good culture is often defined by the participants in a team. It can be that really energised person who joins a team, just transforms the way that everyone feels about their job, or that really funny person that makes everyone just have a thrill of coming to work every day. We could all recognise little bits like that. And I was interested when I was doing the research and when I was putting it down. I was really inspired to think, what could someone... Maybe it's like a 20-something woman in a team, or someone who's just getting going in their career, but they, armed with an article and a passion, can they change their culture? And probably the bit of the book that I'm most bewitched with the science is the bit about human sync. So let me describe what human sync is. This is amazing phenomenon where if you look at any human beings when they do anything in synchrony with each other, it tends to have like this magical invisible effect. So if you get people who march together or dance together or sing together in a choir, or in one case rowing. So scientists took rowers and they got these rowers to row individually on rowing machines. Or they got another group to row in sync with each other. So they had to row in coordination for the rowing to work. Then they tested them for pain threshold. Now, this is something that psychologists love doing. So they put these armbands on them, they inflated the armband, and they saw how much pain they could withstand. The rowers who'd
Brutal.
been... I know, in it. At least it wasn't pulling fingernails off.
Yeah.
How many... But the rowers who'd been rowing in sync could withstand twice the amount of pain as the others who couldn't. They'd done exactly the same exercise, but the ones who are in sync, there's this magical quality. And so I'm fascinated with this. And then if you observe, what you find is that there's a brilliant anthropologist really, called Robin Dunbar, famous for a number of things, Dunbar's number being one of them. But and his thing was that actually we used laughter as a similar thing. So animals use grooming to get into this sync with each other, to get sort of build this affiliation. And humans quite often use laughter. Right. That's really interesting, because how often when things are going bad at work do you feel embarrassed to be laughing? The boss walks past and says, you're laughing. Haven't you got something to do? And when you suddenly find this sort of this science, this psychology of how humans are connected by laughter, you think, wow, this isn't like some indulgence. This isn't some superfluous thing. This is the magic that builds teams. And so, to just discover all this science on that and then just think none of this science reaches people in work. It's gone beyond like a project and become like a passion for me. It's like, can we make people's working lives more fulfilling by bringing laughter back into people's jobs?
And it's interesting, like such a simple concept, and like laughter. Hopefully, we laugh every day. Some people might not. But it's interesting how simple the concept is, but yet how long it might have taken us to get there.
Yeah, I chatted exactly that, and it achieves so many things. I mean, look, the book isn't just about laughter, but just to finish off on laughter, I chatted to a wonderful British academic, Professor Sophie Scott, and she did the BBC Christmas lectures last year. That if you get the opportunity to see them on YouTube, they're just just dazzlingly powerful. But she said something interesting to me. She said, animals, when you watch dogs play, so next time you go to the park, watch this, next time you go to the park, watch this. Dogs, when they're playing, they'll do something which is, anyone who's done yoga will recognise it. It looks like a downward dog. They'll do this thing where they press down on their front two legs. And it's like this is just programmed into their DNA. But this signals to dogs what's about to happen is just a bit of fun. No harm will happen here. So if you see a dog do that and then go and bite the other one's stomach, they know that's not real. And she said laughter does the same for humans. So laughter signals no harm will happen here.
It's almost like a comfort zone, isn't it? Yeah.
And so like when you're laughing with people, these people are sort of, that you're sort of in sync with them, that you're in a sense of collaboration. As a result, it can really foster powerful creativity. It can lead to our most creative ideas. I was reading a treatment of Daniel Kahneman. So Daniel Kahneman, really famous organisational behavioural economist. won the Nobel Prize for behavioural economics. And he said his most creative time with his partner was when he was working with a guy called Amos Tversky, and he was laughing every day. He said, we just used to laugh all day, every day, and yet we were just coming up with these incredible ideas. And that's what you find. You find that, if you show Robin Williams clips, if you show comedy clips to people, and then you give them creative puzzles, they tend to be more free in their thinking. They connect more ideas more. Laughter's got this magical quality. But the strange thing is, we're sort of squeezing laughter out of offices. Most of us now have between 16 and 23 hours a week of meetings. We have 140 emails a day. And the thing that goes is laughter. We sort of sit there with headphones on, trying to get emails done.
Do you think injecting more laughter into the workplace could potentially break down things like hierarchies, a sense of, I guess, entitlement from others? Do you think that that's an element of it?
Look, I think probably, I give 30 changes that we can bring to work, and sort of laughter's one of them. I think it's just one of the things that helps along the way. One of the other things I've observed when I studied really successful businesses, I'm on a mission against meetings. I think we could halve all meetings now, and there would be no cost. And I chatted to this brilliant sort of neuroscientist who basically looked at the creativity of meetings, and he said that meetings account for about 2% of office productivity. So they don't achieve a lot.
I find that very easy to
Yeah. And actually, Robin Dunbar, he said that back to that thing that he was saying, he said that we humans, if they sort of have a big social group, they need to spend time doing social grooming, which is the equivalent of meetings and emails. So you're sort of doing it as a means to sustain the group, really. But meetings don't achieve a lot. But the one thing I've observed is in really successful companies, they tend to find the rhythm of doing these social meetings.
Right.
Really strange thing, where almost the objective of the meeting is nothing more than getting people together. And I think back in the day, it's what the pub used to do. Going to the pub at the end of the day. Think about going to the pub is that it's self-selecting a bit. You tend to find that it skews towards men rather than women. It tends to skew towards non-parents rather than parents. And so you end up with a certain cohort of the group in the pub, but not everyone. And if you think that pubs probably had some magic to them, can you actually recreate that by creating a social meeting? So one organisation I met, they had Crisp Thursday.
Oh.
4:30 on a Thursday. Everyone would gather around like the conference table, and there would be some Pringles and kettle chips laid out, and they would have Crisp Thursday. And the woman who told me about it said, when our new CEO started, we were sort of embarrassed to say it to him. Because he would, right? It sounds like, hang on, what? Well, we can get rid of that for a start. It just sounds so silly. And what you find that when you look at the ways to fix work, often they are these things that you might initially be embarrassed to mention. One of the other things that I'm really passionate about is interruptions are the enemy of getting work done. So what you find is that turning your notifications off on your phone is one of the single most powerful things you can do to reduce the stress on yourself. And when you say to people, I want you to turn the notifications off on your phone, most people think, not for me, and actually my clients need to get a hold of me.
Yeah, that's
and
a nice idea.
Yeah.
No.
But the guy who did the research into it from Telefonica, he found that when he got people to turn the notifications off on their phone, he couldn't get enough people to do it for a week. So he asked people to do it for a day. Turn your notifications off on your phone for a day. Half of all the people who did it still had them turned off 2 years later.
No.
Right. So it's just like one of these, it's a tiny little nudge. And it's, is it going to solve work overall? No. But it's like, it's one contribution. That's why I've put 30 contributions in the book. If you did 10 of these things, then I think you'd find you'd start enjoying your job a bit more again.
What would you say? I know you've got 30 and they're all very important, but what would be your sort of ideal 5 that people would certainly, introduce into work?
Yeah. So, for number 1, I think turning notifications off. Number 2, again, it seems equally trivial, but taking a lunch break. And British people have got used to eating lunch at al desco, right? We sit at our desks, Pret sandwich, a meal deal, whatever it is, and we sit at our desk and we
Yeah.
think, oh, we've got 40 emails. I'll just get through these emails. What you tend to find is that our productivity and our creativity goes down if we work through lunch. So, taking a lunch break is really important. I think, for me, not emailing at the weekend. And it's normally bosses who do that.
Yeah.
So, you're presented with, the big challenge of a book like this is, how do you change a culture if the boss won't change?
Yeah.
And my view is, you want someone to. So I've given loads of TED talks, I've given loads of articles that people can bring to their team away day, their team offsite, because the one reason to stop emailing at the weekend is it kills everyone's creativity, and presumably bosses want their teams to be creative, right? So if you know that by emailing, generally you look if a boss emails on a Sunday. Every hour a boss emails on a Sunday, every one of their team emails for 20 minutes. So the moment the boss opens their email on a Sunday, this sort of like this mini molehill of stress is building up in their team. And so, getting rid of weekend emails. For me, just I think, if I was going to pick another couple, probably having trying different meeting formats, actually. So, I'm very strongly in favour of reducing the amount of meetings. One thing that Amazon do is they do these meetings that rather than they never present PowerPoint slides in an Amazon meeting. They present documents.
Right.
And so because no one has the time to do pre-reads of documents, they read the document in the room.
Oh.
If you try it, it's one of the most uncomfortable things you can ever do. But once you get used to it, it's really powerful. So, bring a document along, read it in the room. Often, that means at Amazon, there's 10 minutes of silence at the start of a meeting. But they say, I was chatting to someone who worked at Amazon. He said, our amount of meetings is radically lower than any company he's ever worked in because you don't organise a meeting unless you've written a document.
Right.
So it takes you a couple of weeks to write a good document. So you don't call a meeting. So you have like a few daily stand-ups and catch-ups, but you don't have a lot of meetings because meetings are decision-making. You only get people there when you've got a decision. So trying like those things out, you start questioning the way that you're currently doing things. I've probably given you 3 or 4 there.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so, sort of... but what I've tried to do is every time... The way I see it is that one person in a team will read this book and might think, I can change our team and I'm going to rip this page out, I'm going to take it to the team meeting and lead a discussion. So there's loads of evidence, loads of science, because that's what I felt was missing before, evidence of how to improve work.
Okay. And sorry, just going back to the whole meeting thing, because I think that's something that a lot of offices do struggle with, and it's very ingrained within the culture. We're making a serious decision, so let's have about 10 meetings, let's have a few pre-meetings, let's have the meeting, and then let's have the post-meeting. And you don't really have time to do anything because you're in meetings. So how could you re-educate leaders to think, this is not productive. This is counterproductive.
For me, the most important thing is that I looked at some wonderful science that was about the capacity of the human mind, right? And there was a book a couple of years ago by a guy called Daniel Levitin. And his one quote in it, for me, is a showstopper because he said... So I can almost remember this quote off by heart. He said, the human mind is programmed to make a finite number of decisions every day. And once it reaches that limit, it can't make any more, irrespective of how important they are. So let's go through that. So a finite number of decisions, what he means, scientists call it ego depletion. So your brain isn't like this infinite thing. Your brain is a bit like your phone battery, right? If you spend all day on staring at like your screen, your phone battery dies by 3 p.m.
Yeah, it's a great way of
treat your capacity at work like your phone battery. And so consequently, you want to make sure your phone battery is at peak through the day, right? That means importance of taking a break, stepping away from it, giving you a chance to refresh. But so consequently, treating work in a different way. And if you look at any of the evidence suggests you can't work an infinite amount of time. In fact, by all estimates, I would say about 50 hours is the most that anyone can work productively. And if you ever doubt that, check in with yourself, because I've done it. I've sat there at a kitchen table emailing at 9 o'clock on a Monday night, and I've sat there and I've thought, what have you actually done in the last hour? You've written 2 emails, you've changed the music 3 times, you've gone and got a cup of tea, you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
But in your head, you're like, yeah, I worked Monday night.
Very
And-
productive.
Right. And so you've got you haven't got the benefit of a relaxation.
Yeah.
But you've sort of laboured through these 2 emails. And so if you look at any of the... It's really important to check in with yourself and see what you've done. I think as soon as that happens, you start thinking, OK, so work is, let's say 40 hours of good work is a good amount. Then you start saying, how can I be the most productive I can be in those 40 hours? Now, sitting in a 3-hour status meeting, actually, what is it accomplishing? You know, often it is status position management. It's often sort of a power thing, and so reducing the amount of time you spend on those things and focusing on more productive things is really important. There was a brilliant thing that I put in the book, looking at the output of the best and worst groups. And there's a guy called Jeff Sutherland. He's the originator of the Scrum methodology, sort of what software engineers use. He wanted to know what the difference between the best teams and the worst teams was in terms of doing work. And what he found, the best teams could do a project in about a week. The worst teams, and it's so remarkable that you can't quite believe this, the worst teams do the same project in about 2,000 weeks. Now, let's think about it. So say you're creating a logo. You know there's a way to do a logo in a week. Everyone's focused, everyone's engineered. And there's also the way that we do things, which is you have the pre-drafts, you have meetings, you send things off, people come back, they do it. There's reviews, there's status meet. People, you know, this sort of collaborative decision making. The end result is still the same, but you've spent 2,000 weeks doing it. And his data, that was based on analysis of 500 projects across different companies. His analysis was that we often do work about work. We don't focus on what the outcome is, create a great new logo, create a new plan for this. We do work about work. As soon as you start thinking about what is the output we're trying to do, I think you can start getting rid of loads of meetings. You can start changing the way you do things, really.
And especially as we live in such a technically driven society these days, obviously you work for one of the most famous tech companies in the world. But do you think that ever really hinders communication? Do you think there's a sort of point to be made around kind of isolation and what technology, I guess, does for employees?
Yeah, I mean, look, my feeling very strongly is that having studied it, that countless experts have come to the same conclusion, that periods of deep work, periods of concentration are where good work gets done. And so if you're constantly being interrupted, whether it's by social media or whether it's by, instant message pings or whether it's by emails, if you're being constantly interrupted, you never quite get into a state of concentrated work. You never quite get into a state where your creative ideas are fully let loose. And, if you're going to do your best work, then you need to do that. One of the best suggestions, this was in the book, is a guy called Cal Newport said to me that he suggests something called a monk mode morning. And that's a couple of days a week, you do 90 minutes of uninterrupted work. So maybe you say to your team, I'm going to do my monk mode morning, 9:30 on Tuesday. I'll be in work at 12. Okay. Or you'll be in work at 11, depending on what your commute is. But you just change the way you're working. And what you tend to find from it is if you shift to that, is you get that document done that's been sitting on your to-do list for 3 months. And when you actually dedicate yourself to do it, you get it done in an hour. It wasn't even that hard, but it's hard when you're doing it in fragments of 3 minutes. So when you're doing a bit of email and then going to add a sentence, doing a bit of email, it actually takes you 20 hours to do something that when you dedicate yourself to it, when you do this period of sort of intense, deep work, you get it done in an hour.
And what would you say to people who, I guess, are under immense pressure from their boss or their boss's boss and who have culturally ingrained that whole interruption, I suppose culture? That's very normal to them. So they are constantly persisting and constantly asking questions. I've worked in environments in the past like that, and you sort of feel guilty in a way for cutting off and isolating yourself. But it's kind of a means to an end, isn't it?
Yeah.
What would you say to people who are finding it difficult with the pressures?
So I think a lot of us find ourselves in a situation where we see what's wrong with the way we're working, and there's a boss standing in the way. Right, that's a situation that most of us recognise. Now, for me, it's about evidence often helps. So it's about, what I've set about doing is trying pointing people to, here's a 4-minute TED talk. Here's something that you bring along to a team meeting to discuss it. Sometimes that's not going to work. And this brilliant work by a woman called Leslie Perlow, who studied Boston Consulting Group. And she found, a lot of them said, I can't stay off email. I'm a consultant. I need to be on email 24/7. What she found was she introduced these micro boundaries where, they didn't email on certain nights of the week. In some cases, they didn't email for the whole of Wednesday. And she found that every time she introduced a micro boundary, people felt happier about their job, felt more connected to their colleagues, weirdly, because they had to communicate, oh, I'm not going to be around on Wednesday. So here's what you need to know. And so that sharing tended to produce more collaboration. Okay. And so, look, I know it's not easy. Trying to persuade a sort of tyrannical boss that you don't want to do these things can be difficult. I remain optimistic that most bosses are open to discussion, but I know how difficult it is. Now, I think evidence is one of the weapons.
So at Twitter, is there anything specific that you've introduced or you've encouraged to very much bolster the culture and make it a great place to work?
The one of the things I was really interested in is when I started doing this, I created an 8-point manifesto. And I just put it out there, and me and someone else, my friend Sue Todd, created it. And I put it out there, and it was 8 points. And the number one point on it was influenced by something that happened at Twitter. Someone came to me and said, look, I've been listening to these podcasts you've been doing. I heard what you said, but I don't know what I'm allowed to do. And I was so devastated because I thought, that's an illustration of modern work, right? We've turned adults into infants. We've created this sort of legion of people who don't know what we're allowed to do. We go through school being told what to do. We go to college and we sort of have to work it out for ourselves. And then we go back to the world of work and everyone's asking what the rules are. It's what a dreadful thing. So I think that's what I've tried to encourage people to do, to have the conviction of having the autonomy to do what they want, really.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been lovely chatting. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.